Welcome back, WNST. Week off here from all Ravens duty, except that there are no off weeks in Owings Mills, Luke Jones, because the world never ends in the National Football League, as you well know, and there will be plenty of coaching work done, not only here, but around the league, as many of these teams are waiting out Patriots coaches, Eagles coaches, amongst others. This is a really sticky, sloppy time of the year, not to mention there were 4 football games over the weekend, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's, for the Ravens, I mean, they're not really being talked about from a national standpoint because they didn't make the playoffs. So, but behind the scenes, there is a lot going on. And, just a few days ago, you and I were talking about the possibility of Greg Roman leaving, understanding he wasn't under contract for 2018. And, less than 24 hours later, he's back in the fold as he's promoted to, assistant head coach. They have Jerry Rossberg as associate head coach. They now have an assistant head coach in Greg Roman. But good for him to be back. Good for the Ravens for him to be back, knowing what he did with the running game, which had been a major problem the previous 2 years. I mean, really, from the time that Gary Kubiak said goodbye to go to Denver, they talked a good game as far as saying Mark Trestman was going to. They were going to try to implement the same exact zone blocking, the outside zone, and all those different things with the running game, and they couldn't do it, and they weren't committed to it, and it wasn't good. And really, that continued to be the case when Marty Morningwig took over, now 2 years ago, as weird as it feels to say that. But Greg Roman came in. They did a much better job running the football. Really, it was the only... for most of the season, was the only saving grace of this offense, if we're being honest. So, good to have Greg Roman back. They hired a quarterbacks coach on Friday as well. Not a big name by any means, but James Urban, they hire from the Cincinnati Bengals, had been their wide receivers coach for the last 7 years. Was a quarterbacks coach in Philadelphia when Morningwig was the OC there, and actually, had a part in. Michael Vick, if you remember, had that renaissance in 2010 where he becomes a starter, made it to the Pro Bowl. Famously now, all the discussion at that point of Vick, who we know what he had been through off the field and being incarcerated, but when he got to Philadelphia, became a bigger student of the game, and James Urban had something to do with that. So, I'm not sure how much of an impact Urban's going to have, but I like the fact that the Ravens did hire a quarterbacks coach. As I've said to you over and over, as far as Marty Morningwig, to me, one of the biggest indictments as far as his time here in Baltimore has been, the statistical regression of Joe Flacco from the point that Morningwig became his quarterbacks coach in 2015. So I like the fact that they're at least bringing another set of eyes, another brain into the room from a passing game standpoint, and we'll see what kind of impact it has in 2018. I think we all know they need playmakers. I mean, first and foremost, they need guys on the field that can make plays, but never hurts to bring in another coach who you hope can bring some fresh ideas to this passing attack.
Well, I think that's everybody right now, right? It's all self-scouting at this point. What went right? What went wrong? What players do we want back? Which players would we like to have back at what price? Ryan Jensen, amongst others. So, you and I are going to literally over the next 60 days be talking about current guys on the roster. The Ravens are going to be scouting throughout the league for potential free agents, and the Tony Jeffersons that are going to be sliding, and Jeremy Macklins that are going to be sliding off of other rosters. And meanwhile, you and I will be convening, dude, in 7 short weeks. I mean, you and I have 9 days of freezing our asses off in Minnesota. 2 weeks later, we're out in Indianapolis, and they're running wind sprints out there, and we're trying to figure out who the 16th pick in the draft is going to be. So there is a little exhale going on here to some degree, and I think we saw maybe a little bit more of a mellow, I called it the Zen version of John Harbaugh on Thursday at the press conference. But and as much as the fans are up in arms, dude, that's a really uncomfortable building right now, right? Ozzie haven't been there 22 years, no playoffs. Eric waiting in the wings, draft record not going so well right now. Quarterback aging, best player on their team is their Hall of Fame rush edge, who is 2 Achilles into this thing at this point and pushing 36 37 years old or whatever he's got, 36, 37, whatever it's going to be. So, this is really a crossroads franchise right now where if I gave you $1 right now, would you bet that John Harbaugh's looking for a job a year from this week? Like, would you bet on them being a playoff team next year or against it? And if you're betting against it, you're probably betting on a regime change here 52 weeks from now, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, look, do I think it's as dire as what the Orioles situation looks like right now? No. At the same time, I think there are a lot of concerns here because of some of the issues you just stated. I mean, think about some of the older players on this team that are still really, really important to their success. I mean, they've missed the playoffs 4 out of 5 years. I mean, no, they haven't been awful over that time, but there should be a lot of urgency. There should be a lot of discomfort. There should be tension in that building. If there's not, then I'm even more concerned than I've already expressed myself to be. I mean, I guess my big question with the Ravens at this point is, who are they exactly? I mean, we always talk about this idea of identity. I know what they've tried to make their identity. They've tried to recreate the 2000 Ravens. I mean, that's how they've proceeded, basically. And it hasn't worked. They've had good defenses, but certainly not defenses that have, when the chips have been down and when the stakes have been at the highest and the leverage has been at the highest, it hasn't come through. On the flip side, it's an offense that they've continued to try to find pieces at the dollar store for. A couple draft picks notwithstanding. Ronnie Stanley, basically that's about it. And a couple day 3 kind of guys. Some nice pieces there, but it's. To answer your question, if I'm betting $1, I mean, if it's only $1, fine. Okay, maybe I'll put $1 on them to make the playoffs. But to sit here with confidence and say that they're going to be better in 2018, I'm not so sure of that. And a lot of it goes back to honestly what I saw over the weekend. I think it was very sobering, not from a standpoint of, well, if the Ravens had gotten in, they could have been really dangerous or they could have made a run. For me, it was more sobering and more depressing to think, really? The Ravens couldn't get in over these teams? This is the tier that they're in now?
Well, the part for me was Jacksonville was beating us 41-0. And every time the Jaguars got into the, defensively, got into the backfield, I said, well, they're certainly a legitimate defensive operation.
Oh, sure.
And then Blake Bortles has no idea where the ball's going when he throws, like Sonny Jurgensen or something. Billy Gilbert.
Yeah. At one point on Twitter, I suggested that the Jaguars might be better off with I think Mark Brunell's 47 years old right now. Maybe with Mark Brunell throwing right-handed, they might be better off than what we saw from Bortles. But getting back to the Ravens, it's just, for the longest time, you like to think that, and they were on that tier with New England and Pittsburgh, and now it's more so, really, they couldn't get in over these teams? They couldn't handle their business to get in over a Buffalo? It's just, that's really disappointing. And that's, frankly, it should be really concerning when you consider they had one of the easiest schedules in the NFL this year, which to me should have kind of carried, that kind of cancels out the excuse of some of the injuries they had early on. So I know fans love to talk about the Ravens being a different team once they get to January, but guess what? Does that even apply when you're not getting the January?
Dude, they got beaten twice in 3 weeks during the holidays by the Bengals and the Steelers on the last play of the game. Yeah. You don't get to play in January when you do that. You don't get to lose again to them in January on the last play of the game. You lost 2 out of your last 3 games. I mean, I don't know what else there is to. When you do that in December, you don't play in January. So, I feel the same way you feel, and I think if I owned the team, I would be even more angry about it, saying, boy, we didn't get the most out of our talent. I mean, we, despite the fact that we had injuries and stuff, that the fact that Tyrod Taylor and Blake Bortles and Marcus Mariota are running around throwing footballs in January and we're not, shame on us. I mean, literally shame on us.
Yeah. And look, I mean, I don't think any of us going into the season really thought that this was a Super Bowl team, but certainly when you look at how this season played out, they should have been in the postseason. And that's speaking as someone who actually predicted them to go 8-8 at the beginning of the season and understood that, I wasn't really high on their offense even before some of the injuries that they sustained. But when you look at how that schedule played out, and where the number of backup quarterbacks, the number of rookie quarterbacks that they played, the way the schedule played out after the bye, and just being very, very favorable. How do you not get to 10 wins? I mean, it's just. I think
you let 4th and 12 go over your head.
Well,
right? I mean, literally, that's how
it's going 1-5 against teams that finished with a over 500 record, and I don't expect you to have a winning record and to beat every winning team that you play. But you go back and look at 2008 to 2012. That team routinely would win 3 or 4 games a year against teams that finished over 500, and then they would take care of their business against bad teams. The Ravens this year, 1-5 against teams that were over 500, and I'm talking their schedule, their record at the end of the season, and they were 8-2 against teams that were 500 or worse. Those 2 losses, home against Cincinnati and home against Chicago back in October. I mean, if you're not going to beat anyone that you're frankly not supposed to beat, when you're talking about some of those winning teams, then you better take care of business and not stub your toe at all against losing teams, against bad teams. And they did that twice at home this year. So it's hard not to look at this season and be extremely disappointed, even acknowledging that, someone like me who was a broken record in the offseason about not liking the lack of activity as far as what they were doing with their offense, and even acknowledging the injuries, even acknowledging that you didn't think they were going to be great going into the season. But, I mean, just look at some of those games, the way that they played out. I mean, they didn't play Derek Carr. They didn't have to play Deshaun Watson. They didn't have to play Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. I mean, they didn't play Andrew Luck. I mean, it just go down the list. I mean, just take care of your business, and they weren't able to do that at the end of the season. So, you can look at next year's schedule and certainly look at some of the road games. Look at the fact that I think they're going to have 8 games against teams that are in the playoffs this month. On next year's schedule, and I think 5 of them are on the road.
They got to go out and play the Chargers. I mean, the road schedule, and then the fact that you're playing the South as well, pretty good teams. You have to go see Cam Newton in his place. Yeah. You're going to have to go on the road down to Atlanta and see Matt Ryan. So, these are issues.
Yeah, they are. And again, don't misconstrue. I mean, we know that how the schedule can change. I mean, Cam Newton might not even be available. He might be hurt. Who knows? You go down the list. I mean, we saw what you do that. I mean, you look.
I don't even know who their backup quarterback is. Carolina. Who is it? I don't even know.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the league, right? I mean, most of the time you don't know who the backup.
Doesn't matter. They're golfing. He's golfing today too.
Yeah. So, but I mean, on paper things can certainly change. But when you look at it just on paper, which is all you can do when it's the second week of January, and you're talking about a team that's not in the postseason, you do look at that schedule and say, hey. From a good fortune standpoint, you can't expect the schedule to lay out as nicely as it did this year for them. So they have a lot of work to do. And again, what do you really hang your hat on at this point? Even some of those things that we've talked about, like Terrell Suggs, like Joe Flacco, who's going to be 33 later this month. I mean, you're talking about older commodities there. I think the defense is good. Do I think it's a defense that can put them in the Super Bowl? Well, when you can't hold a lead against Andy Dalton and the Bengals in Week 17, a team that's playing for nothing, then I'm going to say no, unless we see young guys get better. And it's fair to anticipate that happening with some guys. I think Matt Judon can be better in 2018. I think Marlon Humphrey's going to be better in 2018.
I think Michael Pierce is going to be better. I mean, a lot of these guys have gotten better, incrementally, right?
They have, and that's a good thing. But at the same time, who are the transcendent difference makers? Who are the transcendent playmakers on this roster? And we've had this conversation how many different times over the last 4 or 5 years, and John Harbaugh made it very clear they need playmakers, and specifically on the offensive side of the ball. But until they do it, I'm going to be skeptical, because we've talked about that over and over. And, it's not easy to do, but at the same time, you got to do it. We've talked about this, and, you and I have talked so much about the Orioles with starting pitching. Yeah, it's not easy to find quality starting pitching, but you got to do it if you want to be successful. The same thing with the Ravens now, finding playmakers. They have they have solid and good players. You need to find a couple great players here. And if you don't, you're going to continue to find yourself in this 8-8, 9-7 territory and coming up short, especially if you're not going to try to be a little more bold in the coaching department, which, we'll see as far as, what the defensive side looks like with new blood.
Yeah, what do you want to see there? I mean, I think we're waiting on Chuck, right? I mean, I don't think we're telling any secrets here that if Chuck Pagano. So if it's not Chuck, then how do you go to Wink and say let's promote from? This was the problem, I think, to some degree with Rex Ryan around here a number of years ago when Harbaugh came in. It is always difficult to get passed over. I think Brian Billick could probably speak to that with Matt Simon a number of years ago. Anytime somebody comes in and sits in the seat in front of you from the outside, even if they were on the inside, maybe there's an understanding, maybe there's not. Maybe Wink's happy being a linebackers coach. Maybe Wink knows he wouldn't be a defensive coordinator anywhere else right now either. So I think that there comes some wisdom and some comfort with all that, and I don't know how much ego gets involved with it, but I do know that they'd love to have Chuck back, and this is a lot about how Chuck's feeling, and if Chuck's back out there in Owings Mills, I can promise you this, it's because it's where he wants to be, and it's an interesting time, I think, anytime there are this many seats that are open out there. I saw Terrell Austin's going to go work for Marvin in Cincinnati, right?
Yeah, I mean, it looks that way, so I think, to me, it's not even about Chuck Pagano versus Wink Martindale versus whoever, whatever other name you want to throw into the equation. Ted Monachino, Steve Spagnuolo. I mean, everyone's speculated. I think most of us, I think the understanding is they're waiting on Pagano to make a decision. And, hey, it's the second week of January. You don't have to make that decision immediately, even if you're the Ravens. I mean, you want to get your coordinator in place here sooner rather than later, but it's not a major rush. But for me, it's not even so much about which one do you prefer. I think they just need they need some fresh eyes and some new blood in that specific spot. I was a bigger Dean Pease supporter than a lot of people here in town. I thought, not so much this year, but go back to 2014, 2015, a lot of hand-wringing about the defense. There wasn't a whole lot of talent on that defense. I thought specifically in the secondary, other than Jimmy Smith, I mean, who did you really like from a talent standpoint in that group? So that's where I defended Dean Pease. But that said, this defense underperformed in some really big moments and certainly left themselves wide open to second-guessing from a call standpoint. I mean, you leave Brandon Carr on an island against Antonio Brown with the game on the line. I mean, you're going to be second-guessed for that. You should be second-guessed for that. So does that mean that whoever comes in, whether it's Pagano, whether it's promoting Martindale, does that automatically guarantee that this defense is going to be better? No. I think there's a lot of things you need to look at, including just the players themselves taking accountability. But I do like the idea of changing things up a little bit there, having a fresh set of eyes in the coordinator role, and seeing if this group can hit another level. Because considering the resources that have been invested in this group, you'd like to see another level. And I think probably the one area that you point to, they could certainly stand to get better at the inside linebacker spot next to Mosley. Patrick Owasso is a nice story, but certainly has his weaknesses. But for me, the obvious one is getting a little bit more consistent productivity from the edge rushers, not named Terrell Suggs. Suggs had a great season for a 35-year-old. I mean, we talked about it at length, but how much longer can you expect that? And if he's not going to be that same guy, or if you say, hey, maybe we need to limit his snaps a little, instead of playing 75 or 80% of the snaps, maybe he's best suited in 2018 playing 60 or 65% of the snaps. Well, it's great to say that, but then someone else has to step up and play at a high level when he's not out on the field. And, I think Judon looks like that, but they need one of the other guys to emerge, whether it's Bowser, whether it's Tim Williams, whether it's moving Kamale Correa back to the outside because the inside linebacker hasn't worked out for him. Whoever it is, they need someone to emerge, not just Judon, but someone else, because, Terrell Suggs, for one thing, Suggs is only under contract for another year. So, regardless of how much longer he wants to keep playing, it's the end is coming, and it's coming very soon for him. So That, to me, is the one area you point to that if this defense is going to find another level, need a little more consistent production from its edge rushers, not named Terrell Suggs.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. We will continue this conversation for the next 9 months or thereabouts as it unfolds on a daily basis. You can find me out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. The morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness at planetfitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. I want to remind everybody, I am re-releasing Purple Rain 2, the book, this week, a chapter a day, every day, beginning Thursday. You can check that out at WNST.net. It will also appear in the morning newspaper. Our WNST tech service is there when the Orioles finally trade Manny Machado or get that draft pick later on. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Of course, Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday, getting you ready for divisional round playoff activities this weekend as we try to thaw out around here a little bit. The SSV on WNST heard from 3 until 5 on Thursday. And, of course, Dennis and Coons Ford sponsoring our WNST tech service. Last but never least, I am a very available individual. Nasty at WNST.net. Finds me. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. I'll be releasing Purple Rain 2 there for you as well. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.